Welcome to this session with a focus on Europe. 3 days after European leaders, minus Britain of course, celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Rome Treaties. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm with Reuters in London. We've got a fabulous panel lined up for you today, but we've only got 45 minutes, so I'm going to keep this introduction very, very brief, and I would like to get some questions from you if you have them at the end. In the program outlining this session, we do raise some very important questions about Europe's current standing and the challenges faced by its manufacturing sector. Despite being the world's biggest market with 500 million customers, competition from Asia, high labor costs, strict climate change policies, Brexit, of course, are all seen as obstacles. In light of highly publicized Made in India, Made in China, and America First programs, manufacturing groups in Europe continue to bemoan a lack of support from the Commission for European industry. They point to EC President Juncker's promise to reindustrialize Europe with a pledge to increase the share of manufacturing in overall GDP to 20%, I believe, by 2020. But in the same breath, we do highlight what Europe has going for it, and we'll talk a lot about that in this session. The most innovative R&D platforms around, a huge proven appetite for technological advancement, and a highly skilled workforce are a few of those. Let me introduce our panel. Next to me is Stefano Firpo, Director General for Industrial Policy, Competitiveness and SMEs at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Next to Stefano is Benjamin Gallezot, Deputy Director General of the Directorate for Enterprise in the French Ministry of Economy, Industry and Digital Affairs. Gleb Nikitin is First Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade at the Russian Federation, and on the end is Roland Sommer, Director General of the Austrian platform Industry 4.0, which is a public-private partnership aiming to ease the move to digitalization. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Let me kick it off with a question to you, Stefano. I want to keep this very open and moving, and do feel free to jump in and interrupt me or your panelists. EU Industry Day, Stefano, was held recently. EU Industry Day. Is there really a European vision for industry?
Well, there is, as you mentioned, there is an important recommendation on targets in terms of reinforcing industry in Europe. There are important initiatives on digital manufacturing, on all the platforms, 4.0 platforms. In Rome, a few days ago, during the Digital Day, there was strong initiatives on what is called the platform to make all the member states' platforms coordinate and collaborate in order to push the transformation, the technological transformation, the technological and digital transformation of manufacturing in Europe. There is a plan which is willing to stimulate investment by in the order of 50 billion euros in the next few years, moving R&D resources, Juncker plan, and other resources. There is a very important plan to create a network of what is called the European Digital Innovation Hubs, which are basically places where SMEs, large corporations, and university collaborate on technological transfer. So I think we are in a way where there is more attention to industry. Industry is not something of the past ages. It's something very modern. It's something which is sustaining our wealth, is sustaining our exports, is sustaining our well-being, and I think there is a strong focus on that. Europe has been very skeptical in approaching industry on a very vertical approach. So it's more approaching industry on more horizontal lines, like digitalization, sustainability, and these sort of things.
Okay, so there's clearly a lot going on, but I wonder, and Benjamin, let me ask you this. I wonder how realistic the Juncker plan is that I mentioned, and that target by 2020. How realistic governments in Europe feel that is.
No, it's very realistic and concrete. I will take you an example. In France, with the Juncker plan, we launched a program to digitalize SMEs. So the Juncker plan and the French government are co-investing in a fund that guarantee fund for loans in SMEs to digitalize. So, it's not theory, it's practical things, and it's money for SMEs. And I totally agree with what Stefano said. Maybe 5 or 10 years ago, there was no vision and no action in Europe. Now there are, at the same time, national initiative, bilateral or trilateral cooperation, and we had a very good meeting also in Berlin with Germany and Italy, and I was in Rome last week for this really important meeting. And so there is a lot of things going on, and I think it's completely realistic. Okay. Now, of course, we are not at the end of the road. We still have a lot of work to do. But and another really important point, Stefano mentioned the transversal approach. It's really key that all the European policies, I mean, in all fields of European policy, trade, environment, all these policy must contribute to industry. And this is what we call the mainstreaming approach, and we are very focused on that, so that there is a coherent vision and not, the right arm saying something and the left arm saying
I guess, with playing devil's advocate, I wonder if we're playing catch-up a little bit in Europe. And we talk a lot about innovation, and we will talk a lot about innovation. Yes. We'll talk a lot about digitalization. And I wonder if we're losing the innovation race, if the digital gap, especially with countries like the US, is so great now that we find ourselves playing catch-up. Roland, what do you think?
Well, I think that you're right and you're not right. I think, to start with, you're not right. I think in Europe we have a very strong technological development, and we have very complex technologies, and this managing complexity is really something where there's a European strength. On the other hand, we have some challenges, and that is with regard to new business models and with regard to data-driven business models, data analytics, etc. And there the US are far ahead, and I think we have to catch up on that.
Gleb, I'd be interested to get your overall opinion on this race, if you like, and where Russia fits into that. And you can talk a little bit about innovation in the R&D space in Russia, in the European context as well.
As for digitalization and our view on other partners, countries, of course, there are several leaders globally in terms of digitalization. And among them, we of course see Europe. And when we develop our policies, we of course share the best practices and take many of good ideas and structures from Europe. For example, when we established our national technological initiative in 2014, we of course discussed that and took as an example the German Industry 4.0 initiative program and other initiatives. Now we are developing the same digitalization program on the level of Eurasian Union. So it's going to be not only a national initiative, but international. And we, of course, open to collaborate with Europe.
What is the equivalent to Industry 4.0 in Russia?
It's another name, but
okay.
Of course the same idea. Within this initiative we have some roadmap. It's called TechNet. It's digitalization, Internet of Things, robotics, additive technologies, and so on, that we are going to establish for beginning within some factories and spread across the country after that. So it's going to be like ideal factory of the future.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe if I can, on this notion of catch-up. It's true that for the, I would say, the B2C platforms, I mean the big platform, we have a gap. But on digitalization of industry, I don't think Europe has a gap versus the United States. If you look clearly, the big European industrial company, they are quite advanced on this question of digitalization of manufacturing. And even the US company, they invest a lot in Europe in this field of digitalizing industry. So we have to be mixed. It's true that we don't have a European Google, but if you look at industry, which is something quite different, then you have a really good initiative, and I think we are on the front, and we are not lagging on this subject.
Who would you, sorry to put you on the spot here, Benjamin, but who would you hold up as best in class in Europe on the digitalization front?
I would say there is no best in class, because each country has its own speciality, some positive things. For example, in Germany, they started really early on Industry 4.0, but it was very focused on manufacturing, I mean factories. We started in 2013, which is after the Germans, but we have enlarged the program, and we have discussion with them, and we have a discussion on standards, and we also have discussion with Italy. So, you know, Europe is very diversified place, and you have champions everywhere. If you look in the car industry, they cooperate on the supplier or on even the car manufacturer. There are all kinds of cooperation, and these are developing very fast.
Stefano, you wanted to come in?
Well, yeah, I agree with but even in the US, you have a lot of Europeans, technology provider who are working on the digitalization of US firms. Today, at the beginning of the plenary, we had Siemens basically using the Maserati brand to market its products. For example, we have Dassault, for example, who had a presentation here. In Italy, you have STM, which is, by the way, the one who powered the Tesla, who powered the SpaceX of Elon Musk. We have Comau in robotics. And what is important in the Industry 4.0 perspective is how you mix these different technologies, which are not just digital technologies, are also very much manufacturing technologies. And you have to mingle these things. And I think that my French colleague is definitely right. Europe is cutting edge on B2B business. This is we are still very strong in these things. We're lagging behind, and I agree also with my Austrian colleague, on the data-driven business models. There is where we want to catch up.
I guess, you know, and I'll move on after I've mentioned this, but this idea that we're not breeding an entrepreneurial culture quickly enough, or we didn't here in Europe. There seems to be that feeling. Would you agree with that?
I disagree. I profoundly disagree. We have a specific problem with, I would say, mature startup. I mean, startups that are 5 years old and need several billions of capital. We have a specific problem in Europe. That's true, and a lot of entrepreneurs from Europe go to the United States when they need big tickets. But if you look at creating startups, you know, in biotech or green tech or industry tech, I think in Italy, in France, in Germany, in all Europe, you have a very, very brilliant European entrepreneurship. And we see Europeans that went to the United States and that go back to Europe because they find a good ecosystem in Europe and good support by the government.
You were nodding. You want to add to that?
I would like to add that it's surprising, but we have the same problem. I see a lot of entrepreneurships and SMEs working within new innovation industries and sectors, but in Russia we unfortunately have very bad access to financing, and you have to go somewhere else. Sometimes we go and don't go back.
I'm actually glad you raised financing, because it was something I was going to come on to a little bit later on, but let's piggyback on that now. Access to capital, access to ready capital, the capital market structure in general in Europe. Surely that hampers the sort of development we really need to innovate industry and to innovate manufacturing. Roland.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this is one of the biggest impediments for startups, because particularly in Central Europe, we have a different tradition in a way, because most of the money would come from banks, and now with the Basel III regime, small and medium enterprises and those with particularly intangible assets find it extremely difficult to get money because what value has a patent, for instance, or what value has an idea in your head? And so I think that we have to come up with solutions to financing small and medium enterprises.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I think that the real problem we have now in Europe is big tickets, because until 100 million or even 200 million, you find capital in Europe. But if you look for 1 billion euro, then
because the VCs are there,
yes,
but the bank model doesn't work like it works in other countries, right? Is the issue?
There are some VCs, but not the overall sum of money is not sufficient to support these really big company. And in the startup process, at one time you have to get bigger and you have to get a lot of money, and that's where we have a problem in Europe. And we have to get professional investor betting more and taking more risk, clearly.
I want to come back to this idea where I started, this idea of a Europe-wide vision. One thing I noticed that when I read the notes that you all sent me separately before this session, you all put very high up the desperate need for collaboration, for cooperation, I guess at many different levels. Now, that suggested to me that we're certainly not seeing enough right now. Is that fair? Stefano?
Well, first you have to consider that one of the big things that these new technologies is bringing about is integration of value chains. If you look, for example, on Italy, France, or Germany, these countries are very much integrated. The chains of suppliers, sub-suppliers are so strictly interlinked that basically the countries are basically together. That's why we need to collaborate, because a policy which is done in a way in Italy has spillover effects on the supply chains on a very strongly integrated global value chain. So it's very important to coordinate the policies, to come up with coherent solution and to a coherent architecture on how to support an even greater integration of value chain. Because the integration of value chain is what helps SMEs to locate in strategic places and get access to market.
So I think we're all in agreement that the need to do it is there. But are we seeing it happen?
Yes. And when we were in Rome last week, there was really a convergence of the priorities for all the countries. Helping SMEs, that's a very important point. Standardization, and there are working groups on standardization at the European level that are progressing. You have test beds, interoperability between platforms, and there are experiments between different platforms in Europe, and technology cooperation. Stefano mentioned STM. The microelectronic is a key point, and it's a Franco-Italian company, and we are progressing on that. High-power computing. Last week in Rome, there was a signature of a letter of intent on high-power computing. Connected car, also, we are launching the cooperation. So, of course, still a lot of work to do, but it's going on.
Okay, Roland?
I think collaboration is extremely important, but you should not collaborate for the sake of collaboration, but there should be a clear gain. And now from an industry point of view, we see that, we have this open innovation regime now, and companies have to transform their organization to be open for ideas from outside, so fighting this not invented here syndrome. And this is from quite a lot of companies a big challenge. And when addressing the whole supply chains, suddenly you have to partner with completely different other institutions like logistics, etc. And then there's also the transfer of data. So if I have a customer and he wants to look into my books and see what kind of data I have, I might be a little bit hesitant to do that. And I think we also have to solve these kind of problems now from an industry point of view or from a single company point of view. But I think we are progressing slowly in that direction, and including increasingly the complete supply chain.
Deputy Minister, what sort of, I'd be interested to hear your views on collaboration in general in this field, the sort of collaboration we're seeing between Russia and other parts of the EU?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to support the position of my colleague Stefano that we need to build value chains, and nowadays it's much more difficult just to sell something. You have to be part of the big project of selling something abroad. But I think that main problem is not the integration between companies and between businesses within the market. As from my point of view, actually, in European Union, this problem is not so extremely important. It appears that it is rare, but it's much more noticeable between regional markets, between, for example, EU, Russia, China, Middle East, the United States, and so on. And to get rid of these problems, to start cooperation, we now need not only integrate the businesses, but integrate policies. We need to discuss our policies. And if we discussed the policies in terms of the barriers, for example, on the basis of free trade approach, and build WTO, for example, and so on. Now I see, not in Russia, but in other countries, I see how governments and policymakers become colder and move from a free trade approach to protectionism sometimes. And if it happens, and if a tendency, we have to sit and discuss industrial policies. Actually, that means specialization.
And that means
what we support in our countries. For example, we support highly innovative metallurgy, but this country is supporting, for example, automotive, and so on, from some basis of this. Anyway, if we don't do that, our business will find way to collaborate, but it will not be so effective if it would be if we do it on the governmental level.
But realistically, how much, given that context, and I'm glad you brought it up actually, because we can't get away with not talking about trade in this session, but given that, that rather sort of insular psychology that is developing, and I know you in particular, Benjamin, have views on this, but the G20 communique leaving out, or omitting now references to the benefits of free trade, et cetera, et cetera. How realistic in that context is it that we will see the sort of cooperation you're talking about at the governmental level?
I think it's absolutely realistic, because I'm talking about the collaboration between bodies and in governments working on economic issues, not on political issues. I would offer actually to put politics aside for us, for ministries of industries, for example, and to continue this talk as our businesses do, because our companies, they continue to collaborate, and European Union remains the main partner in collaboration, in trade, in projects of localization with Russia, despite all these restrictions and tensions and so on.
All right, well, I'd be very interested to hear what you both think, having heard that from the Deputy Minister, in terms of that sort of cooperation and collaboration. And let's face it, Russia reaching out in that way, because it clearly sees the benefits of doing that as businesses do it. What do you think?
Well, just to go back to your question, I think one of the main drivers, which is still very strong and will be increasing in the future in terms of technological advancement and digitalization, is even closer integration. And this is a fact. It's going to happen. The flow of data is so, predominant, so strong, so violent somehow, so disruptive, that it's going to happen. Notwithstanding what we might do in terms of protectionism or not protectionism. What we need to do, and this is a political call, is how can we make this technological transfer more inclusive, more helpful, more capable of creating wealth or creating well-being, of creating jobs, which is a key issue there, and how policymakers can respond to this stimulus, which is there, it is a fact. But this fact will probably create losers and winners. This will create social problems, will create job problems, and we might be very clear about these things. It's not the new, we have to approach this new push for integration, even stronger integration, not how we pushed 10 years ago globalization, thinking this is just heaven. This is not going to be heaven. There are going to be costs, there are going to be risks, there are going to be people who will lose out of it, and we have to address these issues.
Okay, Benjamin.
Yes, just a comment. Europe is clearly maybe the most open continent for trade in the world. So it's a fact, and I think everybody agrees on that. And during the last G20, you saw the European ministers advocating for free trade. So, the European industry exports a lot, Europe imports a lot. A lot of jobs in the European industry depend from exportation. So we need this trade and we need this collaboration. There is no, it's sure. Now I agree with Stefano. There are also problems with globalization. So we have to treat this problem. We have to work on skills. We have to work on new jobs. We have to work on the question of inequalities. And it's the role of states to mitigate the consequence. But this open trade is vital for Europe, it's clear.
Roland, I'm glad that Benjamin mentioned skills and jobs. I'd like to open it up into that realm now with your views on that. Education, skills, jobs, HR, these are all really, really important pieces of this puzzle. Again, what are we seeing in your country and in Europe in general that gives us hope we're moving quickly in the right direction?
Well, I have the impression that in many cases, with regard to digitization, skills are one of the key answers, and I'm also very convinced on that. And I heard also in the morning session several people saying we don't know what skills we need. I wouldn't say that, because I think what we would need is the basic skills, and there's one skill set which we desperately need, and that is handling with data. And all the other things, I think there's increasingly also the trend within industry that your workplace at industry is at the same time your training place. So there's much more, and that we will see much more training on the job. And we've seen in a couple of countries, including my home country, Austria, that these kind of dual studies, dual vocational trainings are gaining ground. That means part of your education is at an educational institution and part is at the company. And that helps both the student but also the company to join forces. And there was a study in Germany made by, on the production level. And more than 70% of the people working in production said, I can cope with the increasing complexity on the production level. So I think we start from a very good level. And of course, we have this continuous training. And one of the challenges for companies is to incentivize people on the production level to really go for training. Yeah. It happened several times that they say, you should go for training, and they say, no, I don't need to. So we have to incentivize, and we have to find solutions how to incentivize them. But I think we have a very good level to start from.
Question of skills is clearly a key question. That's why we have identified it as an area of cooperation. And once again, we can benefit from different experiences. For example, in Germany, but it's also true in Austria, they have a very good system for apprenticeship on regular manufacturing jobs and skills. In France, we have a very good talent pool for software, for coding. And it's not completely the case in Germany. So we are exchanging on how to improve our systems, because the future is having both the skills needed for digitalization, I mean people who are able to code, but also the traditional works, the traditional skills of industry, because you have to adapt your coding to specific environment of industry. You have to know these basic skills. So really that's an important skill, and we are investing a lot. We are creating a Franco-German academy in Munich and in French engineering school in France. And these are very important projects. You know that at the European level, Erasmus was really a success. It would be great to have a kind of industrial Erasmus program dedicated to exchange in Europe.
You know, I don't want to, just to finish up on the skills piece and the jobs piece, I don't want to steal the thunder of my panelists in tomorrow's skills panel, which is in here at 12:20, by the way, if anyone's interested. How much scaremongering is there when it comes to AI and robotics and machine learning and jobs going, big scale job redundancies as a result of that? How much scaremongering would you say, Stefano, is going on?
Well, obviously, when there is technological advancement which is so powerful as the one we are experiencing now, we need to be scared. Fear is there. But as far as I know, history tells us that technological advancements has always brought new jobs and bigger jobs. So we don't have to be too much scared, I think. For sure, in many areas, we are going to see a jobless factory, for sure. We're going to experience places where there are no humans working. But we also see places, and probably places we don't even know now, where people will perform jobs that we can't even name today. So I think the opportunities are huge. We don't have to be scared about this transformational and transitional period. What is key is that as probably the labor market will be even more flexible, that's for sure, we need to empower the people with the skill. Otherwise, in a lifetime, cycle. Otherwise, the up and downs, the technological advancement will create more losers than winners.
And this is this upskilling piece, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about this just before we came on. I know you got some strong views about this.
I have a little bit of a different opinion on that. I think we will never see a factory where there are no human beings.
I can bring you to one if you want.
Okay. But
there is one in Italy? Yeah. Is there?
Because there's one very big Japanese car manufacturer, for instance, and he employed more people in production because he realized that this continuous improvement process stopped. And we need the brains of the people to also think around the corner. I heard just recently saying somebody, we will never run out of jobs, because what is the jobs about? It's about solving problems, and also in the future we will have problems, and that means we need people to think about these problems and solve these problems, whatever these problems are. So I'm quite confident on how jobs in the future will look like, and that we have enough.
150 years ago, people were scared by the steam engine. So now, would you say that inventing the steam engine is a stupidity? No, it's history. You have to look at that on a historical basis.
But people are writing books now with titles like "Humans Need Not Apply," right?
Yeah, but once again, 100 years ago, 50% of the people in Europe were in agriculture, and they were producing less than today. So in historical phase, you have less and less people in different sectors, but at the same time, new jobs are created in new activity. So it's mainly a transitional process, and you should not be afraid of progress. You should not be afraid. You have to adapt. You have to take the opportunity of the progress, but you should not be afraid.
Okay, Deputy Biz.
I see that all these guys from European Union are very optimistic. Probably the seconds of entering European Union to become optimist. Actually, I'm optimist too, but I would not exaggerate these fears and catastrophes that sometimes predicted by forecasters. But I think that we have to prepare ourselves to some reality, and should be a little bit scared, because actually we see now that the gap between rich and poor globally increasing. It's strange, but it's there. And I'm afraid that due to this technology revolution, we will see the rising gap between rich and poor countries, unfortunately. And because of that, I think that we need to think about decreasing the concentration of new achievements in some very competitive regions or territories. Of course, I understand that it's objective reality. Then if some country is more competitive in terms of resources, skills, labor, financing, of course, industries and production will move towards these countries. Some people will get new type of job there. For example, managing robots within these countries. Free guys will get this job within this country. But in 10 countries, 100 people lose their job because of this process. Okay, again, it's not the, now I'm exaggerating, of course, a little bit, but the tendency is there, and we have to address it somehow.
Okay.
Think about that.
All right, look, I'm just looking at the clock here. We've only got about 10 minutes or so left. If anyone does have a burning question, put your hand up and we'll get to it. Of course, the one thing that I need to bring up is Brexit and the way it changes things, if indeed you think it does change this discussion in any way. What does it do you think, to Europe, the competitor in manufacturing, with Britain leaving the European Union? Stefano.
Wow. But let me first think that the Brexit, in my opinion, is a disaster. I think it's a disaster for everybody, and particularly for UK. It's quite funny because UK had a very successful reindustrialization policy in the last 10 years with the catapults and these sort of things. It was very successful. From Peter Mandelson's plan, for me, which I do policy making in Italy, the experience of UK in the last 10 to 15 days is best in class, in my opinion. With the Brexit, there are menaces there, that this process can go on. There is a lot of focus on the financial capital, London remaining the financial capital of Europe, but also in terms of manufacturing, I think the scenario is very uncertain. And I think the UK is taking a too optimistic approach on the negotiations. I'll stop there.
Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to add something to that. I can't show my colors, unfortunately.
Clearly, we can't know until the negotiation progress, because there are so many scenarios. Some are catastrophic, some are... all are bad, but some are catastrophic.
It's interesting, though, when you look at innovation, something we've talked about. And I was speaking to someone from Deutsche Bank this morning, and the question came to me, and it was, which city now in Europe do you view as the capital of fintech? Once you take London out of the picture, we seem to be asking ourselves these sorts of questions when we talk about innovation and digitalization as we move forward. Well, these are questions we're asking ourselves now, right?
I don't know if there is one capital on fintech. The information age, of course, location is important, a place is important, but we have a diversity in Europe, so we can manage several hubs. And people are communicating, and people are so I'm not sure that, first of all, fintech is it's a big sector. You have insurance, you have a market, you have a retail. So there are many possibilities, and I think a lot of cities are investing, a lot of clusters are investing and cooperating. So we will see, but I'm not sure that there will be one only city, and maybe London will continue to have a relation with these hubs in Europe. So,
anyone else want to say anything about Brexit generally before we finish? Go ahead, Roland.
For me, one of the main questions, also with the Brexit, but also with the situation in the US, is what will be done to research and to researchers, because both the US and also the UK very much relied on creative people coming from abroad, and now with ever more stringent immigration laws, that also has an effect on research, and also with regard to the UK, if they cannot participate in such a way as it used to be with Horizon 2020 and all the European programs, whether this will have an effect on the research area. And research means there comes innovation, and increasingly when managing complexity, there is a very close relationship between companies and research institutions, and we will see how this, what the effect will be, and maybe there is some sort of reinvigoration of the European spirit, and particularly with regard to research and innovation.
Okay. Is there anyone out there who has a question for our panel? Anything Europe related? If not, we will we'll move it on pretty quickly. Anyone else? Anyone with a question for the panel? No? All right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to just put this idea out there, and then you can use this as an opportunity to, from which to build a few closing thoughts. And my question is this. Could Brexit, could change that we've seen in the US, could the rise of populism, some of the other things we've talked about, protectionism, serve as a wake-up call and speed up better collaboration, broader integration, and growth-oriented policies in Europe? Could it be a catalyst for the sorts of things that we are looking for now? Stefano, why don't I start with you?
Well, easy questions. Well, I don't know. We don't know. It's still too early, probably, to see the consequences of unintended consequences. So it's very, very uncertain still. For sure, in my opinion, the technological drive and the business drive is still for more and more integrated markets. And the case is there, and for free trade, because this has been a paramount lever of well-being and wealth creation. And so the case, to bet on entrepreneurship, to bet on free trade, to bet on technology advancement, to support technology advancement, also because we don't have a different way to approach. We have to support it, because otherwise this will happen. I think there is no option, in my opinion. Europe is still very much committed on these values. And I hope that our two very strong counterparts, the US and the UK, will maintain the same values.
Okay. Anyway.
I like very much this idea of wake-up call, because when we wake up, you look at the situation in Europe. Of course, if you look at the newspaper, sometimes it's very gloomy. But 4 years ago, newspaper was saying the euro is dead. The euro is still here and will be still here in the following years. Europe is attractive for foreign investment. We have 27 countries, 28 with the UK, that have created the most closest union in the world, country that had fought for hundreds and hundreds of years. You started your introduction with saying that the European industry is in decline. It's not true. European industry is not in decline. When you see all these European champions, the production now is getting higher. The economy is getting better. Innovation is going quite well. So we have to be, maybe I'm too optimistic, but when you look clearly at the situation after this wake-up call, finally, it's really best to go forward than to go backward. And if you look backward, what was Europe before the European Union, then you see something very, very bad.
Gleb, Nikitin.
I would join my friends as an optimist on this issue, and will just deliver my confidence that it's a wake-up call. Anyway, we can call it other word, choosing other word, but actually these tendencies, free trade, protectionism, they always change each other. There are cycles in policies. And of course, we passed the bottom, and now we will go towards free trade approach again and collaboration approach.
Okay, Roland.
I also think that it was a wake-up call for the EU. And there was a couple of weeks ago a survey, and so more people than in last year, for instance, said they are pro-EU within the EU. So I think there's some kind of European spirit, and now we think about what has been achieved by the EU, but also where are the challenges, because there are some challenges where we relied on other partners and where we have to develop our own European strength on that. And I think this could be an opportunity. Every threat is also an opportunity to do something else. And I think it would also be an opportunity to have a policy process that is a little bit closer to the normal people on the street. Because one of the problems of Brussels is that it seems too far away for everybody, or for sort of the normal human being in each of these countries, and bringing the policy-making process closer to the needs of the people, that could also be an opportunity for that.
Okay. That was the Focus on Europe panel. Hopefully we gave you a little bit of food for thought there. I want to thank you very much indeed, all of you.